Don't let them find me. Those 4 words, whispered by a half-frozen child in a Montana snowstorm, changed everything. Before this night was over, one biker would make a decision that would shake an entire county to its core. And before this story was done, 500 men and women on motorcycles would ride straight into the heart of a conspiracy nobody was supposed to survive long enough to expose. If you're new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, every single word of this matters. The snow had been falling since noon, but by 8 o'clock that night it wasn't falling anymore. It was attacking. Jack Walker had ridden motorcycles through 48 of the 50 states. He had ridden through desert heat that turned asphalt to tar. He had ridden through flash floods in Tennessee that came up so fast they swallowed the road before he could react. He had ridden through mountain passes in Wyoming where the wind hit you sideways and made the bike feel like a kite on a string. But this was something different. Northern Montana in January had a particular kind of cold that didn't just get into your jacket. It got into your thinking. It slowed your brain down the same way it slowed everything else down. The kind of cold where your fingers stop hurting after a while, and that's when you know you're in real trouble because that's when they're dying. Jack, everyone called him Blaze, had for 30 years, ever since he came back from the Gulf with a burn scar along his left forearm and a look in his eyes that made people step back when he walked into a room. Blaze had spent the afternoon doing what most people in Silver Creek didn't know he did every winter. He had loaded his truck with cases of bottled water, canned goods, blankets, and propane canisters, and he had driven them out to the Hendersons, the Crawfords, and old May Tillman, who hadn't left her property in 3 years since her hip gave out, and who would rather freeze to death than ask for help. He had dropped off the last load at May's place around 6:30. She had pushed a plate of oatmeal cookies into his hands without saying a word, because that was how May said thank you, and he had eaten 2 of them on her porch before the cold made standing still impossible. The drive back to Silver Creek was supposed to take 40 minutes. The storm had other ideas. He was moving at maybe 15 miles an hour on Highway 2, which had gone from a 2-lane road to something that looked more like a suggestion buried under 18 inches of snow. His headlights were doing almost nothing. The wind was throwing snow horizontally across the beam, and every few seconds, a gust hit the truck hard enough to push it half a foot to the right, and he had to correct, and then another gust would come from the left, and he'd correct again. He was focused, completely focused, because on a night like this, a moment of inattention was all it took. That was why it surprised him when he saw it. He almost didn't stop. That was the honest truth, and he would tell people that later without flinching, because Blaze Walker was not a man who dressed things up. He almost didn't stop because what he saw in the sweep of his headlights as the truck ground slowly around a long curve was what looked like a piece of blue tarp half buried in the snow at the edge of the drainage ditch that ran alongside the highway. Could have been trash. Plenty of people dumped things on this stretch of road. He'd seen refrigerators out here, old tires, bags of household garbage that split open in the summer and drew crows for a mile in every direction. His foot was already moving back to the gas when something stopped him. He couldn't explain it afterward. Not really. People asked him about it many times, the federal investigators, the reporters, the documentary crew that came through Silver Creek 8 months later, and he always said the same thing. He said it wasn't anything he saw. It wasn't anything logical. It was something closer to a feeling in his chest, like a hand pressing against his sternum from the inside. Like something in him recognized something in that bundle of blue tarp before his eyes did. He stopped the truck. He sat there for a second, engine running, wipers beating back and forth against the snow, and he thought about how stupid it would be to get out of the truck in this. He thought about how it was almost certainly nothing. Trash, a piece of blown-off roofing, a dead deer maybe. Then he thought about how he would feel in the morning if it turned out to be something else. He got out of the truck. The cold hit him like a door swung into his face. He had his jacket, his gloves, his boots. But 15 steps off the road, the snow was up past his knees, and the wind was so sharp it made his eyes water immediately. He moved toward the shape at the ditch's edge, and he was almost there when his foot broke through a thin crust of ice, and he went down to one knee in the frozen water underneath. He barely noticed, because he was close enough now, close enough to see that the tarp was moving. Not much. Just the faintest rise and fall, so small he might have missed it, but it was breathing. Hey, he said. His voice came out rough, caught by the wind and torn sideways. Hey, I've got you. He pulled the edge of the tarp back. What he saw underneath it stopped him cold, stopped him in a way the temperature never had, because underneath that tarp, curled into the smallest possible shape a human body could make, was a child. A boy. Young, blonde hair frozen into a kind of stiff halo around a face that had gone a terrible color. Not quite gray, not quite blue. Something in between that Blaze had seen before in his life and never wanted to see again. His lips were cracked and white. His hands were bare. His clothing, a thin long-sleeve shirt, jeans with a tear at one knee, sneakers that were soaked through, was completely inadequate for 40 degrees above zero, let alone 40 below zero with wind chill. He was alive. Barely. Blaze got his arms under the boy without thinking, moving on instinct, the way you do when thought is too slow for what the moment requires. The boy weighed almost nothing. That was what hit him first, not the cold, not the color of the boy's skin, but how little he weighed. He was 9 years old, Blaze would find out later. He should have weighed 60 or 65 pounds. He weighed maybe 45. I've got you, Blaze said again, and you're okay. I've got you right now. The boy's eyes came open. They were blue, pale blue, almost colorless in the truck's headlights. And for 1 second, just one, they focused on Blaze's face with an intensity that was completely at odds with the rest of him, with the hypothermia and the starvation and the cold that should have made thinking impossible. The boy's lips moved. Blaze leaned in. 4 words. Don't let them find me. Then the eyes closed.
Behind.
Blaze drove faster than was safe. He drove faster than was smart. He drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand pressed flat against the boy's chest, feeling for the rise and fall of breathing, because he needed to know every few seconds that it was still happening. He called Danny Reyes before he was back on the highway. Danny was the closest thing Silver Creek's Hells Angels chapter had to a logistics man. He was also, as it happened, a former Army medic who had come home from 2 deployments in Afghanistan and used his severance pay to open the only decent mechanic's shop in a 40-mile radius. The phone rang twice. Yeah. I need you at Silver Creek Medical in 15 minutes, Blaze said. Maybe 10. A pause. 3 seconds. Danny had learned years ago not to ask unnecessary questions. I'll be there in 8. I've got a kid, child, maybe 9 years old. Hypothermia for sure, probably longer than that. He's breathing, but it's shallow. I found him in a ditch off Highway 2 near the Cutter's Bend curve. Another pause, shorter this time. What was he doing out there? I don't know yet. Blaze? I don't know yet. Danny, I'll know more when I know more. Just be there. He hung up. The boy hadn't moved. His breathing was shallow, but it was continuous, and Blaze took that as a good sign and focused on the road and on keeping the truck straight and on not sliding into a ditch himself because he was pushing 50 on roads that weren't fit for 30. He talked to the boy the whole way. He didn't know if the boy could hear him. It didn't matter. You did good, he said. You stayed alive out there, and that's the hard part. The hard part's done. I'm going to get you somewhere warm, and they're going to get you fixed up. You hearing me, you did the hard part already. The boy said nothing. Blaze kept talking. Silver Creek Medical Center was not a large hospital. It was a single-floor clinic with an emergency room staffed by 2 doctors and a rotating cast of nurses designed to stabilize patients until they could be transported to the larger facilities in Great Falls. On a normal January night, it was quiet, paperwork, maybe a frostbite case or a slip and fall. Tonight, Danny Reyes was standing in the ambulance bay when Blaze pulled in, and behind him was Dr. Patricia Voss, who had been the clinic's emergency physician for 11 years and who had seen enough northern Montana winters to not be easily alarmed. She was alarmed now. They had the boy out of the truck and on a gurney in under 90 seconds. What's his name? Dr. Voss asked, walking fast beside the gurney, her penlight already in her hand. I don't know. Where are his parents? I don't know. She looked up at him, just a glance, but it said everything. I found him in a ditch on Highway 2, Blaze said, in a tarp. He was alone. He said, don't let them find me, and then he went unconscious. He spoke 4 words. That was it. Voss looked back at the boy. Her jaw tightened. You did the right thing getting him here fast. Another hour out there, and we'd be having a different conversation. They pushed through the doors. Blaze stopped at the threshold. Emergency room policy. He knew it. He stood in the bay with the snow melting off his jacket, and watched the doors swing shut and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Danny came and stood beside him. Neither of them said anything. After about 30 seconds, Danny said, 40 below wind chill tonight. How long you think he was out there? Long enough. Somebody put him there, Blaze. It wasn't a question. Blaze looked at him. Yeah. A 9-year-old doesn't walk out to Cutter's Bend in a blizzard and wrap himself in a tarp. No, Blaze said. He doesn't. They stood there in the ambulance bay with the snow coming down around them, and neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that somebody had left a child in a Montana ditch in January and expected that child to die there. By the time Dr. Voss came back out to talk to him, Blaze had been joined by 3 other members of the Silver Creek chapter. Word traveled fast in a small chapter, and when Danny had called 2 people to let them know what was happening, those 2 had called 2 more, and so until the waiting area of Silver Creek Medical had 6 Hells Angels sitting in plastic chairs with their jackets across their laps, quiet in the way that men become quiet when something has reached them somewhere below the noise. Voss walked in and looked at them and then looked at Blaze. He's stable, she said. He's going to make it. Someone in the back exhaled. Blaze didn't move. Hypothermia, yes, but he pulled out of it faster than I expected. He's severely malnourished. We're looking at significant caloric deprivation over an extended period, not days, weeks at minimum, probably longer. He has bruising on his arms and torso, consistent with... She stopped, chose her words, consistent with rough handling, and he is severely dehydrated. Silence. He's going to be okay, Blaze asked. He's going to live, Voss said carefully. Whether he's okay is a longer conversation. Blaze nodded. Did he say anything when he came around? Voss's expression shifted in a way that Blaze had learned over 48 years to pay close attention to. It was the expression of someone deciding how much to share. He said one thing repeatedly before he lost consciousness again, she said. He said, please don't call the police. The room went very, very still. He's a child, Big Tommy said from the back. Big Tommy was 6'4" and had hands like catcher's mitts and had ridden with the Silver Creek chapter for 22 years. His voice was usually the loudest thing in any room he entered. Right now, it was barely above a whisper. Why would a child say that? Nobody answered, because there was only one answer and nobody wanted to say it yet. A child who was left to die in the snow by someone. A child who woke up in a hospital and said, please don't call the police. Those 2 facts together meant something specific, and everyone in that waiting room knew it, even if no one was ready to put it into words. His name was Ethan Parker. They found that out 3 hours later when he woke up enough to answer basic questions with Dr. Voss, and when she gently asked his name, he said it without hesitation, like it was the one thing about himself he was still sure of. Ethan Parker. How old are you, Ethan? 9, I'll be 10 in April. Can you tell me where you live? A pause, long enough to notice. I don't live anywhere right now. Where's your mom's sweetheart? His face did something complicated. She died when I was little. It's just me and my dad. Was. Another pause. My dad's gone now, too. Gone as in... He died, Ethan said, flat, like a fact, like something he had said so many times to himself in the dark that it had stopped being able to hurt him in the ways it used to. There was an accident. They said it was an accident. Dr. Voss made note of the word they, of the way he said it, of the very specific construction of that sentence. They said it was an accident. Not it was an accident. They said it was. Who were you with before tonight, she asked, before the storm. And here the boy did something that Dr. Voss would later describe to investigators as the most heartbreaking professional moment of her 11 years in emergency medicine. He went quiet for a very long time. Not the quiet of someone who doesn't know the answer. The quiet of someone who is deciding very carefully how much of the answer is safe to give. 9 years old, calculating survival. Finally, he said, some people, at a house, outside of town. What people are to... His eyes moved to the window, back to her, to the window again. Are the police coming? He asked. Not right now. Promise, she hesitated. I need to understand why that scares you, Ethan. He looked at her for a long moment. Because one of them is. He wouldn't say more than that, but Dr. Voss wrote it down verbatim, and when she came back out to the waiting room and told Blaze he didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then he said, I need to make some calls. He stepped outside into the snow to do it. Not because he needed privacy from the doctors and nurses. They already knew more than most people ever would about what was happening. He stepped outside because he needed the cold air and the silence and the particular kind of clarity that came with both. He called Marcus Webb first. Marcus was their chapter president, which technically made him Blaze's superior. But in 20 years of riding together, the hierarchy had become mostly ceremonial between them. What mattered was that Marcus was smart in the particular way that cut through everything unnecessary and got to the center of a thing. "It's 11 at night," Marcus said. "I know. This better be good." "It's not good," Blaze said. "It's the opposite of good." He told him everything, start to finish, the tarp, the ditch, Ethan's weight, which he still couldn't stop thinking about, the bruising, the malnutrition. "Don't let them find me. Don't call the police. One of them is." Marcus was quiet through all of it. When Blaze finished, Marcus said, "He give you a name, any kind of name?" "Not yet. He's scared of something specific. Not just scared in general, scared of a specific thing or a specific person. You can see it in the way he talks. He measures every word." 9 years old. 9 years old. "You find anything on him?" "Before the hospital, ID, anything." "Nothing. No wallet, no phone, no anything. Whatever he had with him, somebody made sure he didn't have it anymore." Silence on the line. Then Marcus said, "Nobody's reported him missing." It wasn't a question, but Blaze answered it anyway. "I've been watching the alerts. Nothing. So somebody took a child, starved him for what did the doctor say, weeks, possibly longer. At minimum. Starved him for weeks or more, beat him enough to leave bruises, and then left him in a ditch in a blizzard to die. And nobody has reported that child missing." "That's where we are," Blaze said. Another silence. Longer this time. "Get some sleep," Marcus said finally. "I'll be at the clinic first thing in the morning. We're going to need to think about this carefully." "Marcus?" "Yeah. Somebody wanted that boy dead tonight. I know. And whatever reason they had for wanting him dead, it's still out there." "I know that too," Marcus said. His voice had shifted. Something in it had gone flat and quiet and very serious. "That's why I said we need to think carefully. Because whatever this is, it's bigger than a missing kid. And whatever it is, the wrong move right now could be very bad for that boy." Blaze looked out at the snow. "Get some sleep," Marcus said again. He went back inside. He found a chair in the waiting room, and he sat in it, and he watched the hallway that led to the room where Ethan Parker was sleeping, and he did not sleep himself, not once, not for a single minute of that long, brutal night, because the boy in that room had said, "Don't let them find me." And until Blaze knew exactly who they were, he wasn't moving. Morning came slowly in Silver Creek in January. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the world outside the clinic windows white and crystalline and deceptively peaceful, the kind of scene that showed up on Christmas cards and said nothing at all about what lay beneath the surface. Ethan Parker woke up at 6:47 a.m. Blaze knew the exact time because he had been watching the monitor through the narrow window in the hallway door, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of the boy's chest. And when the boy's eyes opened and he looked at the ceiling with the careful, assessing look of someone who has learned to figure out where they are before they figure out whether they're safe, Blaze felt something in his own chest release that he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He knocked softly. Ethan's eyes came to the door. Blaze opened it a few inches. "Hey," he said. "I'm the one who found you. Name's Blaze. Can I come in?" Ethan looked at him for a long moment. The same calculation that Dr. Voss had seen. The same terrible, careful weighing. Then he said, "Okay." Blaze pulled the chair close to the bed and sat in it. He was aware, sitting next to this small, pale boy with the bruised arms and the hollow cheeks, of how he looked. He knew what he looked like. 6'1", 230, the scar on his forearm, the cut on his jacket. He had spent 48 years being looked at a certain way by certain kinds of people, and he had made his peace with it long ago. But right now, it mattered. "You hungry?" he asked. Ethan blinked, like the question surprised him. "They're going to bring you breakfast," Blaze said. "But if there's something specific, I can go get it." "I haven't," Ethan started, stopped. "It's been a while since I had a lot of food." "I know, the doctor told me, so we start easy, whatever sounds good." Something moved through the boy's eyes. Something brief and unguarded that was gone before Blaze could fully identify it, but that he thought might have been the simple shock of being asked what he wanted, of being asked at all. Pancakes, Ethan said quietly, if that's okay. Pancakes is more than okay. Blaze stood up, looked at the boy, sat back down. Can I ask you something first? Careful eyes. But he nodded. Last night you said don't let them find me. And you told the doctor not to call the police. I'm not going to push you on things you're not ready to talk about. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But I need you to know something. Whatever it is you're scared of, whoever it is you're scared of, you're not going to be dealing with it alone. You understand that part is over. Ethan looked at him for a very long time. Why would you help me? He said. You don't know me. No, Blaze said. But I found you in a ditch in a blizzard last night. That means something in my book. The boy thought about that. Then he said very quietly, how many people know I'm here? A few of my people. The doctors. That's it. He has people everywhere, Ethan said. In the police, maybe the hospital too. He always said there was nowhere I could go that he wouldn't know about. Blaze kept his face completely neutral. Inside, something was turning cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. Who said that? Ethan looked at the window. Mr. Kane, he said. Richard Kane. Blaze Walker had lived in Silver Creek for 11 years. He knew Richard Kane the same way everyone in town knew Richard Kane, which was to say Kane was everywhere without ever seeming to be anywhere. His name was on the buildings, on the county commission, on the donor plaques outside the library, and the new fire station. Richard Kane Construction had built half the roads in the county in the last decade. Kane Logistics ran trucking routes that connected Silver Creek to every major hub in the state. Richard Kane was by any measure the most powerful private citizen in Silver Creek, Montana. And a 9-year-old boy with starved arms and bruised ribs had just told Blaze Walker that Kane was why he was afraid of the police. Blaze sat with that for exactly 5 seconds. Then he stood up and said, I'll get you those pancakes. He walked out of the room, closed the door quietly behind him, stood in the hallway, and took 3 very deliberate breaths. Then he pulled out his phone and called Marcus. We have a name, he said when Marcus picked up. He heard Marcus go still on the other end of the line, heard the quality of the silence change. Tell me, Marcus said. Blaze told him. There was a pause that lasted long enough for Blaze to count his heartbeats. Richard Kane, Marcus said, not a question. Just the name turned over like an object being examined from every angle. From the mouth of a 9-year-old kid, Blaze said, who weighs 45 pounds and has bruises up and down his arms. And who is scared that Kane has people in the local police department. The pause this time was much shorter. Don't go to the local police, Marcus said. I wasn't planning to. Don't go to anyone yet. Let me make some calls. You stay with the boy. Already planned on it. Marcus hung up. Blaze stood in the hallway for another moment. Then he went to find the cafeteria because he had promised a boy pancakes, and a man like Blaze Walker kept his promises. What neither of them knew yet, what they had no way of knowing, standing in a hospital corridor in Silver Creek on a January morning, with the snow white and clean and deceptively innocent outside, was that Ethan Parker was not merely a child who had been locked away and abused by a powerful man with reasons to keep him quiet. He was something far more dangerous than that. He was the only living person who knew where his father had hidden the truth. Marcus Webb arrived at Silver Creek Medical at 7:43 in the morning, stomping snow off his boots in the lobby like a man arriving for a fight he'd already decided to win. He was 51 years old, built like a refrigerator someone had taught to think, and he had the kind of face that made people instinctively lower their voices when he walked into a room. He spotted Blaze immediately sitting in a plastic chair in the hallway outside Ethan's room, with a paper coffee cup in each hand and the expression of a man who hadn't slept and wasn't pretending otherwise. Marcus took one of the cups without asking, sat down in the chair next to him. Tell me again, he said. All of it. Blaze told him again, all of it. When he finished, Marcus sat quietly for a moment, turning the coffee cup in his hands. Then he said, no missing persons report, nothing on the state alert system, nothing federal, nothing. I checked twice on the way over. Kid named Ethan Parker, 9 years old, Silver Creek area, 0 results. Blaze looked at him, which means either nobody cares enough to report it, or somebody made sure the report never got filed, Marcus said. Those are your 2 options. They both knew which one fit better, Because a child doesn't vanish for weeks or months without a teacher noticing, without a neighbor asking, without someone somewhere picking up a phone, unless the right people had been told very quietly to put the phone back down. He mentioned a school, Blaze said, before he fell back asleep this morning. Just in passing, said something about how he hadn't been since before his dad died, which means somebody knew he was out of school and didn't flag it. In this county, who controls the school board budget? Marcus asked. Blaze looked at him steadily. Kane Logistics donates to the county education fund every year. $40,000. It's on the county website. Marcus nodded slowly. The kind of nod that isn't agreement. It's recognition. The slow recognition that the shape of something is becoming clear, even if the details are still blurred. We need to know who Ethan's father was, Marcus said. Everything. How he died, when he died, who was involved. I've got Danny on it. Good. What about the boy? He talked to you this morning. A little. He's scared, but he's not broken. There's a difference. Blaze paused. He's smart, Marcus. Careful smart. The kind of careful you only get when the cost of a wrong word has been very high for a long time. Marcus stared at the floor. 9 years old. 9 years old. They sat with that for a moment. Then Marcus crushed his empty coffee cup in one hand, stood up and said, "Nobody comes in or out of that room without one of us knowing about it. I'm going to call Phil Garrett in the state attorney's office. Old friend, we trust him." "You sure about Garrett?" "He's the only law I'm sure about right now." Marcus started down the hallway, stopped, turned back. "And Blaze?" "Yeah. When Danny finds the father's name, you're going to want to sit down for that part. I can feel it." He walked away. Blaze looked at the closed door of Ethan's room. He didn't sit down. Danny Reyes called at 9:17. Blaze stepped outside to take it standing on the clinic's front steps in the January cold, and what Danny told him in the next 4 minutes rearranged everything he thought he understood about what was happening. "Father's name was Tom Parker," Danny said. He was talking fast, which was unusual for Danny, who was constitutionally the most unhurried person Blaze had ever met. The pace alone told Blaze something. Age 36 at time of death, civil engineer, worked as a contractor for the county infrastructure office for 7 years. "Infrastructure," Blaze said. "Roads, bridges, public construction." "Public construction?" "Yeah, exactly. Now here's where it gets interesting." A pause. Blaze could hear Danny clicking through something on a computer. "Tom Parker died 14 months ago. Single vehicle accident on Route 191 heading north out of town. Icy road guard rail, steep drop. Sheriff's office ruled it accidental. Case closed inside of a week." 14 months ago, Blaze said. "So Ethan's been what, in Kane's custody for over a year?" That's what the timeline suggests. There's no record of any child protective services involvement after Parker's death. No record of a guardian being formally assigned. No record of Ethan being placed anywhere officially. He just disappeared from the system. He never existed in the system after Tom Parker died. It's like someone reached in and erased him. Not deleted, erased. There's a difference, eh? Deleted leaves traces. This is clean. Blaze pressed his back against the wall of the clinic and looked up at the white sky. "Danny, he said, "what's your Tom Parker work on for the county?" Another pause. Longer this time. "That's the thing I was about to get to," Danny said. "Tom Parker spent his last 2 years as a contractor, primarily assigned to audit existing infrastructure projects. Specifically, and I'm reading this directly from a county budget document I found online specifically to verify cost reporting on projects managed by Kane Construction and Kane Logistics. He was the county's watchdog on Kane's contracts." The silence that followed that sentence had a particular quality to it. "He was the guy checking Kane's math," Blaze said. "He was the guy checking Kane's math," Danny confirmed. "And then he drove off Route 1911 night and the math stopped getting checked." Blaze said nothing for a moment. He thought about a 9-year-old boy who had weighed 45 pounds in his arms, who had said, "Don't let them find me," whose father had been watching a powerful man's money very carefully right up until the moment he wasn't watching anything at all. "Does anybody else know this?" Blaze asked. "I'm looking at public documents," Danny said. "Anyone could find this, but you'd have to know to look, and you'd have to know what you were looking at." "Forward everything to Marcus." "Already done." "Danny," Blaze paused. "Good work." He went back inside. Ethan was awake when he came into the room, sitting up in the hospital bed with his breakfast tray across his lap, the pancakes Blaze had ordered for him, and eating with the deliberate, careful pace of someone who had learned that eating too fast after not eating was its own kind of punishment. He looked up when Blaze came in, and something in his face relaxed slightly, and Blaze noticed that and filed it away because a child who relaxed slightly when he saw you was a child who had decided at some level to trust you. And that was not a small thing. Good, Blaze asked, nodding at the pancakes. Really good, Ethan said. Then after a moment, thank you. Don't mention it. Blaze sat in the chair. How are you feeling? Better, warmer. A pause. My hands still hurt a little. That's normal. That's them coming back to life. It'll stop. Ethan looked at his hands, turned them over in his lap. You stayed all night, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Yeah. Why? Blaze looked at him. Because you asked me not to let them find you. I take that kind of thing seriously. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he said, You know about my dad. It wasn't a question either. I know some things, Blaze said carefully. I know his name was Tom. I know he worked for the county. I know he died 14 months ago. They killed him, Ethan said. Just like that. Flat and certain, the same way he'd said my dad's gone now too. Not with anger. Not with tears, with the absolute conviction of someone who has had 14 months to know something is true and no one to say it to. Tell me about that, Blaze said. Ethan set his fork down, looked at the window. My dad was really good at math, he said. He always said math doesn't lie, people lie. Numbers don't. He paused. He was checking numbers for the county, on construction stuff, roads mostly. And so he stopped. He told me some of it. He said the numbers were really wrong, like millions of dollars wrong. He said somebody was taking money that was supposed to build roads and keeping it and making it look like the roads got built right when they didn't. Did he tell you whose money? He told me it was the county's money, people's money. He said regular people were paying taxes and the money was supposed to fix bridges and schools, and it was going in someone's pocket instead. Ethan's voice was steady. Too steady, the way children get when they are reciting something they have rehearsed to themselves many times. He was scared. He didn't want me to know he was scared, but I could tell. He started doing things differently. He made copies of everything. He sent emails to people he said he trusted. Do you know who he sent them to? No, he didn't tell me that part. A pause. But he did tell me something else. Right before he stopped again, swallowed. Right before the accident. He sat me down and he said, Ethan, I need you to remember something. And I said, okay. And he told me about a hiding place. He said if anything ever happened to him and things got bad, I needed to find it. The room felt very still. A hiding place, Blaze said carefully. Ethan nodded. He said he put something there, something important. He made me repeat the location back to him 3 times. I thought he was being, his voice cracked very slightly for the first time. I thought he was being weird, like a dad thing. I didn't think he stopped, collected himself, 9 years old and collecting himself. I understand, Blaze said quietly. 3 days later, Ethan said he was gone. The silence in the room lasted a long time. Blaze didn't push. He sat with the boy in the quiet and let the quiet do what it needed to do, because he had learned in 48 years that some moments needed to be witnessed rather than filled. Finally, Ethan said, Mr. Kane came to the house the morning after the accident. He said he was my dad's friend. He said he was going to take care of me. He said a long pause. He said my dad had owed him money. He said I was going to stay with him until it was sorted out. He said if I told anyone or tried to leave or tried to contact anyone, there would be problems. What kind of problems? Ethan looked at him. His eyes were old in a way no 9-year-old's eyes should be. He didn't say. He didn't have to. The way he said it, you just knew. Blaze nodded. How long were you there? He asked. 13 months, Ethan said, without hesitation, which meant he had been counting. Every single day he had been counting. 13 months and 11 days. Blaze's jaw tightened. He kept his face neutral with some effort. And then last night, something shifted in Ethan's expression, fear briefly surfacing, then being pressed back down. One of the men who worked for Mr. Kane, I heard them talking. They didn't know I was listening. Two of them. They said Mr. Kane had decided it was getting too risky keeping me there, that someone was starting to ask questions about my dad's accident. He looked at the window. They said I was a loose end. He said it the same way he'd said everything else. Matter of fact. 11 words that contained something monstrous delivered in the voice of a child who had lived so close to that monster for so long that he'd lost the ability to be shocked by it. They put me in a truck, Ethan said. I don't know who was driving. I couldn't see. They had me wrapped in that tarp. They drove for a long time and then they stopped and they opened the back and he paused. They just left me. Blaze sat very still. And then you found me, Ethan said. The simplicity of it was the most devastating part. And then you found me, as if it were ordinary, as if the distance between those two events, being left in a ditch to mine and being found, were just a matter of ordinary logistics rather than the narrowest margin between everything and nothing. Yeah, Blaze said, I found you. He stood up, looked at the boy. That hiding place your dad told you about? He said carefully. Do you still remember it? Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said. Blaze nodded. We don't have to do anything about that right now. You focus on eating and getting your strength back. Okay. Okay, Ethan said. Then quietly, Blaze, yeah. You said I wasn't alone in this anymore. I meant it. Ethan looked at him. There's a lot of them, he said. Kane has a lot of people. Money, lawyers, police. A pause. How many people do you have? Blaze thought about it. Thought about the Silver Creek chapter, the chapters in Billings and Missoula, the network that ran from here to the Idaho border and east to the Dakotas, the men and women he had known for 30 years who had never once in 30 years failed to answer when something that mattered required an answer. Enough, he said. He had no idea in that moment how true that was. But the thing that happened next moved faster than any of them were prepared for. By noon, Danny had pulled Tom Parker's employment records and cross-referenced them against a list of every county infrastructure contract Kane Construction had won in the past decade. The numbers were obscene. Over 8 years, Kane had been awarded 63 county contracts totaling just under $40 million. Standard audit showed everything in order. But Danny, who had 2 tours in Afghanistan and a mechanic's eye for things that didn't fit, had found something in the bid documents that made him call Blaze at 12:07 with his voice 3 notes higher than usual. The inspection certifications, Danny said, on 11 of the biggest contracts, the ones Tom Parker was specifically assigned to audit in his last year. They're signed off, but the signatures, a pause. Blaze, the signatures are dated after Parker died. Say that again. 11 inspection certificates. They should have been signed by the county engineer and the project contractor before payment was released. Parker's job was to verify those signatures before the final payment went through, but he died before these were signed. So either someone forged the signatures after he died, Blaze said, or someone backdated them. Either way, millions of dollars in county payments got released on projects that were never properly inspected by anyone alive at the time. Blaze walked to the window of the waiting room. Outside, the snow was bright and still. How much, he said, total, on those 11 contracts? Danny's voice was quiet. $14,200,000. Blaze stood very still. $14 million. 14 million reasons for Tom Parker to have an accident on Route 1911 icy night 14 months ago. 14 million reasons for his 9-year-old son to disappear into a house outside of town and never come out. Send everything to Marcus, Blaze said. Every document, every date, encrypted. Already compiling it. And Danny Way, yeah, watch your back today. A short pause. You think they know we're looking? I think a man who's willing to leave a child in a blizzard, Blaze said, is a man who's watching very carefully for anything that looks like a threat. He paused. We just became a threat. He hung up. Marcus appeared in the hallway doorway 20 seconds later as if he'd materialized from the conversation itself. He had his phone in his hand and his expression had the controlled intensity of someone running calculations behind their eyes. Garrett's in, Marcus said. State Attorney's Office. He's pulling Parker's accident file himself today quietly. He says if what we're sending him looks like what he thinks it looks like, this goes federal before the weekend. Good. It's not all good. I just got a call from Angie Reyes, Danny's wife. Blaze went still. She says 2 men in a black truck have been parked at the end of their street since 11 this morning. The hallway between them felt suddenly smaller. Danny's at the shop, Blaze asked. Yeah. Call him. Have him stay inside. I'll get someone there. Marcus nodded, already dialing. Blaze turned around and looked at Ethan's door. They know, he thought. Maybe they'd known since last night. Maybe someone at the clinic had made a call they shouldn't have. Maybe it was the truck that had dropped Ethan in the ditch. Maybe the driver had come back, seen tire tracks, figured out that the boy hadn't died the way he was supposed to. However it had happened, it had happened. Kane knew the boy was alive. And if Kane knew the boy was alive, then the clock that had been ticking quietly in the background since last night had just gotten very loud. Blaze went back into Ethan's room. The boy was still aiding. He looked up when Blaze came in, and whatever he saw in Blaze's face made his own face change. Kids picked up on things faster than adults gave them credit for, especially kids who had spent 13 months watching adults' faces for signals about what was safe and what wasn't. Something's wrong, Ethan said. Not wrong, Blaze said. He kept his voice level, steady. But we're going to need to move you somewhere safer, today. Ethan's fork went down. They know I'm here, he said. It wasn't a question. We think so. We're not sure yet, but I'm not going to wait to be sure. Ethan looked at his hands again, then back up. The hiding place my dad told me about, he said. We should probably get to it before they do. Blaze looked at him, at this thin, starved, bruised, remarkable child who had survived 13 months of something designed to break him and come out the other side, still thinking about what needed to happen next. Yeah, he said, we probably should. I'll need you to take me there, Ethan said. I remember where it is, but I can't drive. No, Blaze said, you can't. Can you come? Oh, yeah, Blaze said, I can't. Can. It was the moment things stopped being a rescue and started being something else entirely. Because what Tom Parker had hidden in that location, what he'd made his son memorize before he drove north on Route 191 for the last time, wasn't just evidence of a crime. It was a weapon. And someone very powerful had spent 14 months and $14 million trying to make sure it stayed buried. They moved Ethan at 1:15 in the afternoon, not through the front of the clinic, not through the ambulance bay where anyone watching the building would be watching. They moved him through the service corridor at the back, the one used for laundry and supply deliveries. The one that opened onto a side street that connected to the alley behind the hardware store 2 blocks east. Marcus had thought of it. Marcus thought of things like that. Ethan walked on his own. He insisted on it. Dr. Voss had tried to put him in a wheelchair, and he had looked at her with those old blue eyes and said quietly, I can walk, and something in the way he said it made her step back and let him. He was still weak. His gait was careful, deliberate, the gait of someone paying attention to every movement. But he walked, and Blaze, watching him move down that corridor in a borrowed jacket 2 sizes too large, felt something complicated happen in his chest. Big Tommy was waiting with his truck in the alley. Not a motorcycle too exposed, too cold for the boy, too easy to follow. The truck was registered to Tommy's sister-in-law in Billings, which was the kind of detail Marcus had thought of in the same breath as the service corridor. Ethan climbed in without being asked. Where are we going? Tommy asked, looking in the rear view at Blaze. Blaze looked at Ethan. Ethan said, my dad's old workshop, outside town, off Miller Road. He kept it after we moved to the house. He said he needed somewhere to think. A pause. Nobody knew about it except us. He paid the lease in cash. He was careful about it. How far? Blaze asked. Maybe 12 miles. Tommy put the truck in drive. They rode in silence for a few minutes. Then Ethan said, without looking up from his hands, he took me there once, just before everything started going wrong. He showed me where the hiding spot was. Under the floor behind the workbench on the left side. He said, he stopped. He said if I ever needed to find the truth, it would be there. He said the truth was the only thing that could protect me. Nobody in the truck said anything. Because Tom Parker had been right, and Tom Parker had also been dead for 14 months, which meant he had known on some level that what he was doing was dangerous enough that he needed his 9-year-old son to be the backup plan. The weight of that sat in the truck like a fourth passenger. 12 miles outside Silver Creek, Tommy turned off Miller Road onto a gravel track that had been partially swallowed by snow. The truck ground through it slowly. Nobody spoke. Ethan was sitting forward, slightly watching the road, and Blaze noticed his hands were pressed flat against his thighs, not fidgeting, pressing down, holding himself steady. The workshop was a converted outbuilding on a property that had once been a small livestock operation. The main house had been empty for years. Tom Parker had leased just the outbuilding, a single-story structure with a metal roof and 2 windows and a padlocked door. Ethan produced a key from around his neck. He'd been wearing it the entire time under his shirt on a piece of cord. He hadn't mentioned it until now. Tommy looked at Blaze. Blaze said nothing, just watched the boy. Ethan unlocked the door and walked in. Blaze followed close behind. The air inside was cold and still and smelled of sawdust and machine oil and something else, paper maybe, or the particular dust of a place that hadn't been opened in over a year. The workbench on the left side was exactly where Ethan had said it would be. He went to it without hesitating, dropped to his knees on the concrete floor, felt along the baseboard, found something a seam invisible unless you knew to look, and pressed. A section of the floor lifted. Underneath was a metal box roughly the size of a hardcover book, fireproof with a combination lock. Ethan keyed in 6 numbers without pausing, and it opened on the first try. Inside the box was a flash drive, black, unmarked, the size of a thumb. Ethan picked it up and looked at it for a long moment, and Blaze understood without being told that this was the first time the boy had seen it. Tom Parker had described it, had told him where it was. But Ethan had never held it. He held it now. Then he held it out to Blaze, and the gesture was so deliberate, so careful that Blaze took it with both hands. "My dad said that was the truth," Ethan said. "He said whoever had that couldn't be silenced." Blaze closed his fingers around it. He called Marcus from outside the workshop while Tommy stayed inside with Ethan. The call lasted 90 seconds. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was how Blaze knew that he was processing something he hadn't been prepared for. "A flash drive," Marcus said. "Tom Parker hid it a year before he died. Ethan knew the location. It's been sitting under the floor of that workshop for 14 months. If it has what I think it has on it, we need to look at it before we assume anything." "Agreed. Bring it to me. Don't connect it to anything networked. I've got a laptop at the chapter house that's never been online." 20 minutes. He went back inside. Ethan was sitting on an overturned crate near the workbench, and Tommy was standing nearby with his arms crossed, not crowding the boy, but present, close. The way large men with good instincts stood near people they were protecting. "We need to get you back somewhere warm," Blaze said. "Did you talk to your friend?" "Yeah." "Is he going to help?" "He's already helping." Blaze looked at the boy. "You did good, Ethan. What you just did, what your dad asked you to do, you did it." Ethan nodded, just once. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think he knew when he hit it? Do you think he knew he was going to die?" The question landed in the cold air of the workshop and stayed there. Blaze thought about Tom Parker, a 36-year-old civil engineer who was good at math and had found $14 million in the wrong places and had spent his last weeks making copies and sending emails and teaching his 9-year-old son the combination to a lock. "I think he knew it was possible," Blaze said. "I think he did everything he could to make sure it didn't matter." Ethan absorbed that. "Because of the drive," he said. "Because of you," Blaze said. "The drive doesn't get found without you. You were his backup plan, Ethan. His whole backup plan." Something moved through the boy's face. Not quite pride. Something more complicated than pride. The recognition maybe that love sometimes looked like giving your child a terrible responsibility because you didn't have anything better to give him. "Okay," Ethan said quietly. "Let's go." The flash drive held 4 folders. Blaze found that out 45 minutes later, sitting at the chapter house on the edge of Silver Creek, watching Marcus work on the offline laptop with Danny leaning over his shoulder and 2 other chapter members, Ricky Delgado and Pete Norwood, standing behind them. Ethan was in the back room with a bowl of soup that Sandra Norwood, Pete's wife, had put together from whatever was in the chapter house kitchen without being asked, because Sandra was that kind of person. 4 folders, and the moment they opened the first one, the room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something changes the shape of what everyone thought they were dealing with. The first folder held financial records, spreadsheets, scanned documents, bank statements, county payment records. Tom Parker had been meticulous in a way that spoke to someone who understood exactly how evidence worked. Everything dated, everything cross-referenced. Column after column showing county contract payments to Kane Construction and Kane Logistics against actual verified material costs, labor costs, and inspection reports. The gap between what Kane had billed and what the work had actually cost was documented in red across 11 major projects spanning 8 years. $14,200,000. The exact number Danny had already calculated independently, which meant Tom Parker had gotten to the same number and done it at first and done it cleaner. He was good, Danny said softly, scrolling through the spreadsheets. This is prosecution ready. A DIA could take this to a grand jury tomorrow. The second folder held photographs, construction sites, materials, equipment, dates stamped in the corners. And alongside the photographs, Tom Parker had included written notes typed, not handwritten, as if he'd understood that handwriting could be challenged, explaining what each image showed. Substandard materials used in place of the specified grade. Missing reinforcement. Incomplete work signed off as complete. Every image connected to a specific line item in the financial records in folder 1. Marcus sat back in his chair. He spent months doing this, he said. This is not a guy who found something by accident and panicked. This is a guy who suspected something, built a case, deliberately documented everything, and then someone found out he was doing it, Blaze said, before he could take it anywhere official. He sent emails, Blaze said. Ethan told me. He said his dad sent emails to people he trusted. Nobody came forward, Danny said. Nobody came forward, Blaze said, which means either those people were too scared or Kane found out who he'd sent them to, Marcus said, and handled it. The room went quiet again. Pete Norwood said, "Open the third folder." Marcus opened it. The third folder held something none of them had expected. Emails, printed, scanned, and saved as image files. Tom Parker had printed his own email correspondence and scanned it before saving it to the drive, which was meticulous in a way that bordered on paranoid, but also meant the record existed independent of any email server that could be wiped. And the emails were not what any of them had anticipated. They were not to county officials or lawyers or journalists. They were to a federal investigator. A specific one. A woman named Agent Carol Reeves, assigned to the FBI field office in Billings. The earliest email was dated 22 months ago. There were 7 emails in the chain. Tom Parker had been feeding evidence to an FBI agent for almost 2 years before he died. And then the chain stopped. 14 months ago. 3 days after the last email, the accident on Route 191. Marcus stared at the screen. Ricky Delgado said very quietly, "So the FBI knew." The FBI knew, Marcus said. Then why is Kane still running his company? Why are his people still in county government? Why is a 9-year-old kid sitting in the next room eating soup because he spent 13 months being held in a house? Marcus's voice was steady, but the steadiness had an edge to it. Those are excellent questions. Blaze said, "Open the fourth folder." The fourth folder was a single document, a text file. Tom Parker had titled it simply "For Ethan." Marcus looked at Blaze. Blaze said, "Open it." It was a letter, personal, direct, written in the plain language of a man who had run out of time for anything but the essential. Marcus read it silently first. Then he read it aloud because the room needed to hear it and because Tom Parker deserved to be heard. The letter said, "If you're reading this, something happened to me. I need you to know it was not an accident. Richard Kane has been stealing from this county for 8 years. I found the proof. I gave some of it to an FBI agent named Carol Reeves in Billings. I don't know if she can be trusted anymore. There are people above her who have connections to Kane's political network, and I don't know how high it goes. That's why I made this copy. That's why I taught you where to find it. The evidence in this drive is everything: names, amounts, dates, photographs, emails. It is enough to put Richard Kane away for the rest of his life. I am sorry I put this on you. I am sorry for all of it. You are the bravest person I have ever known, and you are 9 years old, and that is not fair, and I know it. Find someone you can trust completely. Give them this drive. Don't trust the local police. Kane has people there. Don't trust the county government. Kane owns most of it. Find someone outside the system. Someone with nothing to lose and nothing to gain except doing the right thing. I love you more than everything. Dad." Nobody spoke for a long time. The only sound in the room was the heat running through the old chapter house, ticking and settling. Then Ricky Delgado said in a voice that came out rougher than he probably intended, "He wrote that for a 9-year-old to find." Yeah, Blaze said. And the kid found it. Yeah. Marcus closed the laptop. He sat with his hands flat on the table and his head down for a moment. When he looked up, his face had the particular set of a man who has made a decision so fundamental that he doesn't need to announce it because it's already operating. I need to make 3 calls, Marcus said. Phil Garrett at the state attorney's office, Agent Carol Reeves in Billings, and the chapter presidents in Billings and Missoula. Reeves, Blaze said, you sure Parker wasn't sure about her? Parker wasn't sure about who was above her, Marcus said. There's a difference, and we're not going to her. We're going around her. We're going to her and Garrett simultaneously with everything documented on the record so that if one of them tries to bury it, the other one can't. He paused. Kane's political network reaches high, but it doesn't reach everywhere. And federal investigators in 2 different offices who both received the same evidence package on the same day that's harder to contain. Danny was nodding. Redundancy. Tom Parker sent his evidence to one person, Marcus said. One person who then went quiet. We don't make that mistake. That. He stood up, looked at Blaze. The Billings and Missoula presidents. I want them on the phone not because we need muscle. I want them on because if this goes the way I think it's going to go in the next 24 hours, Kane is going to realize the walls are closing in. And men like Kane, when they realize that, do one of 2 things. They run or they get dangerous. And if he gets dangerous, Blaze said, then I want more than 6 people standing between him and that boy in the next room. Blaze went to check on Ethan. The boy had finished his soup. He was sitting at the small table in the back room with his hands wrapped around the empty bowl, and he looked up when Blaze came in with the expression of someone who has been waiting for news and has been trying very hard to look like he hasn't been. We looked at the drive, Blaze said. He sat down across from the boy. Your dad was thorough. He put everything on it. Everything. Ethan nodded. He also left you a letter, Blaze said. On them, for you to find when you found the drive. Something happened in Ethan's face. A crack in the careful, controlled surface. Small, brief, but real. What did it say, he asked. His voice was steady. His eyes were not. He said he loved you more than everything, Blaze said. And he said you were the bravest person he had ever known. The crack widened for just a moment. Then Ethan pressed his lips together and looked at the table and breathed once, twice, and when he looked up again, the surface had closed back over. But his eyes were bright in a way they hadn't been before. He was right about finding someone, Ethan said, outside the system, with nothing to lose. That part of his plan worked out, Blaze said. He would have liked you, Ethan said. He liked people who did the right thing when it was hard. Blaze looked at the boy for a moment. Can I tell you something, he said. Ethan nodded. I almost didn't stop. Last night on the highway, I almost kept driving. Ethan looked at him. I need you to know that, Blaze said, because you asked me why I'd help you, and I said it was because I found you in a ditch. But that's not the whole answer. The whole answer is that something made me stop when I almost didn't, and I've been alive long enough to know you don't ignore that kind of something. You understand? I think so, Ethan said. Your dad trusted you with the most important thing he had done, Blaze said. You carried it for 13 months. You didn't break. You didn't give it up. He leaned forward. That's done now. What comes next, that's on us, not you. You did your part. For the first time since Blaze had found him, Ethan Parker looked like a 9-year-old boy. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Okay, he said. It was at that exact moment that Danny appeared in the doorway, and the look on his face erased everything quiet in the room. We've got a problem, Danny said. Blaze was on his feet before Danny finished the sentence. In the main room, Marcus had his phone pressed to his ear and was listening with the expression of someone receiving information they had hoped not to receive. He held up one finger, wait, and listened for another 15 seconds. Then he said, when? And listened again. Then he said, don't let anyone leave the building and I'll call you back in 10 minutes. He hung up. He looked at Blaze. That was Garrett, he said. He pulled Tom Parker's accident file from the sheriff's office 2 hours ago. He just called back to tell me the file is gone. Gone. Not misplaced, not misfiled. Gone. The physical file, the digital backup, the evidence log, everything associated with the Parker accident investigation has been removed from the sheriff's system. Garrett's contact inside the office says it happened sometime this morning. The room processed that. This morning, Blaze said, after we started pulling documents, after Danny started asking questions. Somebody told them we were looking, Marcus said. Blaze thought about the two men in the black truck parked at the end of Danny's street this morning. He thought about a 9-year-old boy who had said Kane has people everywhere. In the police. Maybe the hospital too. How fast can Garrett move? Blaze said. He's already filing for an emergency federal document preservation order, Marcus said. It won't stop Kane from destroying what he already knows about. But it puts the federal machinery in motion, and it does it on the record. Kane can't call in a favor to stop a federal preservation order without leaving fingerprints. And Reeves? I'm calling her next. Marcus looked at the flash drive which was sitting on the table beside the laptop. But first I want 3 copies of everything on that drive. Three, different physical media, different locations. He looked at Ricky and Pete. You two are driving to Great Falls tonight. 1 copy each. You know who to leave them with? Neither man asked questions. Ricky picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Pete was already headed for the door. Marcus, Blaze said. Yeah. Kane knows the drive exists. He's known since Tom Parker died. That's the whole reason Ethan was kept alive instead of... He stopped, glanced at the doorway to the back room, lowered his voice. That's why the boy was kept. In case they needed to find out where Parker hid the evidence. In case they needed leverage. Marcus met his eyes. They never broke him, Blaze said. 13 months and they never got it out of him. Now we have the drive, and Kane knows the clock is running. He's already cleaning files at the sheriff's office. What does he do next? Marcus thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. He does what powerful men do when they run out of time, Marcus said. He makes it personal. He comes after the witness. Blaze turned around, walked back to the doorway of the back room. Ethan was still sitting at the table. He looked up. We're moving again, Blaze said. Ethan stood up without question, without complaint, without a single word of protest. He just stood up the way he had been standing up and moving and surviving for 13 months, because that was what you did when you didn't have the option of not doing it. Where, he asked. Somewhere Kane doesn't know about, Blaze said, and this time we're not going alone. He pulled out his phone and called the one number he had never in 30 years called for something like this. It rang twice. Church, the voice on the other end said. It's Blaze Walker, Silver Creek chapter. I need the Billings chapter president, now. A 3-second pause. Hold. He held. And while he held in a cold chapter house in northern Montana with a 9-year-old boy standing 3 feet away and a flash drive in his jacket pocket that contained 14 million reasons for a very powerful man to make very dangerous decisions, Blaze Walker felt the moment shift. The way it shifts sometimes. The way you feel it in your spine before you can name it. Something was coming. He just didn't know yet how large it was going to be. The Billings chapter president was a man named Cole Hutchins, and he listened to everything Blaze said without interrupting once, which was how Blaze knew he understood the gravity before Blaze finished explaining it. When Blaze stopped talking, Cole said, "How old is the boy? 9? A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. And you're sure about Kane? Sure, not just feeling sure. We have a flash drive with 8 years of documented evidence. Financial records, photographs, emails to an FBI agent in Billings. Tom Parker spent 2 years building a federal case before he died. The case is built. We just need to get it to the right people before Kane finishes cleaning up the edges." The boy is an edge, Cole said. The boy is the edge, Blaze said. He's the only living witness to the custody. He's the one who knew where the drive was. And Kane's people are already moving. They pulled the accident file from the sheriff's system this morning. Cole was quiet for a moment. Where are you right now? Chapter house. But we can't stay. Marcus thinks Kane makes a move on the boy when he realizes the clock is running. Marcus is right. Another pause. I'm going to make some calls. Don't move until you hear from me. And Blaze? Yeah. Nobody touches that boy. You understand me? Nobody. That was already the plan, Blaze said. He hung up. Marcus was across the room on his own phone, and from the clipped, precise way he was talking, Blaze could tell he'd reached Agent Carol Reeves in Billings. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. Marcus did most of the listening. When he hung up, he stood completely still for a moment, with his hands still on the phone, and that stillness told Blaze everything before Marcus opened his mouth. Reeves knew, Marcus said, about the drive, about Parker, about Kane, about the investigation. Marcus turned around. She said she'd been trying to push the case forward internally for 14 months. She said every time she escalated it, it got redirected or delayed. She said 3 weeks ago she filed an internal complaint about the obstruction and was told to take personal leave. Ricky Delgado said they benched the one agent who was actually working it. They benched her, Marcus said, which means someone with reach inside the FBI or with reach to someone inside the FBI has been sitting on this case since Parker died. The room absorbed that. It was Danny who said what all of them were thinking. This isn't just a county corruption case. This goes higher. A lot higher, Marcus said. Reeves said she can't act through official channels right now. She's on leave, which means anything she does professionally is compromised. But she said, he paused, she said she has a contact, Deputy U.S. Attorney in the District of Montana, someone she trusts personally outside the chain that's been handling the obstruction. She wants to take the drive directly to him. Tonight. Can we trust her? Blaze asked. Tom Parker trusted her, Marcus said. And I think the 14 months she spent trying to push this case while getting shut down every time says something. Or it's the perfect cover, Pete said from the doorway. Silence. I know, Marcus said. That's why we don't give her the only copy. Blaze nodded. Ricky and Pete were already leaving for Great Falls with 2 copies. A third would go with Marcus separately. Reeves would get the 4th if they made one. Make the copy, Blaze told Danny. Keep it encrypted. Reeves doesn't get it until she's standing in front of the Deputy U.S. Attorney and we have confirmation the meeting is happening. Danny moved to the laptop without a word. Blaze went back to the doorway of the back room. Ethan was standing now, not sitting, and the change in posture said something. He had heard enough of the conversation, not all of it, but enough to know the situation had shifted. He looked at Blaze with those pale eyes and said, "How many people are involved in this above Kane?" "We don't know yet. But it's more than just Kane." "Looks like it." Ethan nodded slowly. "My dad said that in the letter. He said he didn't know how high it went." He paused. He was scared it went too high for the evidence to matter. "Evidence always matters," Blaze said. "It just matters differently depending on who's holding it." He looked at the boy. "That's why we're putting it in as many hands as possible, so no one person can make it disappear." Ethan thought about that. "Like how he sent me the location," he said, "instead of just keeping it himself." Exactly like that. Something passed through the boy's face. Recognition, maybe. The shape of his father's thinking visible in the way Blaze was operating. Like seeing a reflection you hadn't expected. "Okay," Ethan said. "What do we do now?" "Now, Mouse," Blaze said, "we wait about 45 minutes and then things are going to get loud." He had no idea how accurate that would turn out to be. Cole Hutchins called back at 3:47 in the afternoon. Blaze stepped outside to take it, standing on the small porch of the chapter house with the cold settling around him like a familiar weight. He could hear something in Cole's voice before Cole said anything meaningful, a particular quality full and certain that he recognized as the sound of a decision already made and already moving. "I talked to the Missoula president," Cole said, "and Great Falls, and 2 chapters in Idaho." Blaze waited. "Blaze," Cole said. "Nobody asked. You understand what I'm saying? I told them the situation. I told them a 9-year-old kid had been starved in a house for over a year because he was the son of a man who tried to expose corruption. I told them the local police were compromised and federal channels had been obstructed, and the people responsible were already moving to clean up evidence. I told them there was a drive with everything on it and a boy who needed to stay alive long enough for it to reach the right people." And Blaze said, "Nobody asked if they should come," Cole said. "They asked when." Blaze stood on the porch in the cold. "How many?" he said. "Right now, confirmed rolling or ready to roll." A pause. 342. The number hit him somewhere below the ribs. "Cole, by tonight it'll be more. Word is moving. Billings, Missoula, Great Falls, Idaho Falls. There are people calling chapters in Wyoming and North Dakota." Cole paused. "Nobody organized this, Blaze. I made maybe 8 calls. Everything after that?" He stopped. "I don't know what to tell you. People heard about a kid in a ditch in a blizzard. They heard about a father who died trying to do the right thing. They heard that a powerful man in a small town had been running over ordinary people for 8 years and had bought enough silence to keep doing it. His voice was level, but there was something underneath it. People got in their trucks. Blaze pressed his back against the wall of the chapter house. 342 people who hadn't been asked, who had heard and decided and started moving. "Where do you want them?" Cole said. Blaze thought for exactly 5 seconds. "Not at the chapter house," he said. "Too concentrated, too visible, and I don't want Kane's people to know how many there are until there are enough that the number changes the math." "Smart." Staging point. Miller County Fairgrounds. It's outside town. It's got covered space for bikes and trucks, and it's off the main roads. Tell them to come in quiet. No formation riding, no vests visible if they can avoid it. Just people coming to a parking area. "Got it." "Cole," Blaze paused. Tell them this isn't about a fight. There's no fight here. The evidence is the weapon. All they're doing is making sure the boy stays safe, and the evidence reaches the people it needs to reach. "They know that," Cole said quietly. "That's why they're coming." Inside the chapter house, when Blaze came back through the door, Marcus was standing at the table with his arms crossed, and Danny was at the laptop, and the room had the particular charged quality of something building toward a point of no return. 300, Blaze said. "Maybe more by tonight." Danny looked up from the laptop. 300 bikers. And growing. Marcus uncrossed his arms. "Then we move tonight. All of it, Reeves meets the deputy U.S. attorney. The copies go to Great Falls. Garrett files the federal preservation order. All of it tonight while we have the numbers to make sure nobody stops it halfway." "What about Ethan?" Danny asked. "Ethan stays with me," Blaze said. There was no room for debate in the sentence, and nobody tried. They moved at 6 in the evening. Getting Ethan out of the chapter house and into Tommy's truck happened fast, efficiently, without any of the ceremony that the moment might have deserved. Ethan climbed into the back seat without being asked. Blaze got in beside him. Tommy drove. Marcus took a separate vehicle with the second copy of the drive. Reeves was already on her way from Billings 3 hours out, and the deputy U.S. attorney, a man named Gerald Foss, whom Marcus described only as someone with a reputation for being impossible to buy, had confirmed the meeting. They were 10 minutes out of town when Ethan said, "There's a car behind us." Tommy checked the mirror. Blaze turned. A dark SUV 4 car lengths back. It had appeared at the same time they'd left the chapter house and had maintained exactly that distance since. "Tommy," Blaze said, "I see it. Don't speed up." "Not going to." Blaze pulled out his phone. Called Marcus. "We've got a tail. Dark SUV, Montana plates. I'll get the number." He read it off. "We're on Route 7 heading west." Marcus said, "I'm calling Cole right now. Don't stop. Don't turn around. Keep your speed." He hung up. They drove. The SUV stayed 4 car lengths back. Ethan was watching it through the rear window, his whole body turned around in the seat, and his face had that quality again, the calibrating, assessing look of someone running scenarios. "They're not trying to be hidden," he said. "They want us to see them." Blaze looked at him. "Mr. Kane used to do that," Ethan said, his voice completely level. "He'd have someone follow the people who worked for him, and not secretly, so they'd know, so they'd feel it." "Intimidation," Blaze said. He said it was cheaper than threats. Ethan turned back to face forward. He liked it when people scared themselves. Blaze looked at the boy and felt something move through him. Anger, yes, but something bigger under it. Something to do with what it cost a child to learn lessons like that. To learn them so well they could explain them calmly at 9 years old in the back of a truck being followed through a Montana winter. His phone buzzed. "Marcus," he answered. 4 riders from the Billings group are 5 minutes behind you," Marcus said. "Cole sent them ahead of the main group. If the SUV is still on, when they get there, they'll be visible," Blaze said. "That's the point." He hung up again. 4 minutes and 50 seconds later, Blaze counted the SUV's headlights, suddenly grew smaller in Tommy's mirror. The vehicle was slowing, braking, pulling to the shoulder. Tommy watched the mirror. "They're stopping." 4 bikes just appeared in their mirror, Blaze said. That was all it was. That was all it took. Not a confrontation. Not a threat. Just the appearance of 4 sets of headlights that hadn't been there before. The SUV had pulled over and within 60 seconds had turned around and gone back the way it came. Ethan had been watching the whole thing. They left, he said. Yeah, because of the motorcycles. Because they didn't know how many motorcycles. Ethan turned that over. How many are there? Blaze's phone buzzed again. A text from Cole this time, not a call, just a number. He looked at it, 471. He showed the screen to Ethan. The boy stared at the number for a long moment. 471 people, he said. They're all coming for me. They're coming because of what your dad did, Blaze said, and because of what you did, and because some things are worth showing up for even when nobody asks you to. Ethan looked at the phone screen a moment longer. Then he said very quietly, my dad would have really liked this. The fairgrounds filled through the evening in a way that Cole later described as the most organized thing he'd never organized. People came in ones and twos and small groups, trucks and bikes, and a few RVs from the families who'd driven long distances, and they filled the covered pavilions and the parking lots and spilled out into the surrounding fields without anyone directing them, because the instinct of people who had gathered for something meaningful was to make room for each other. By 9 o'clock that night, the number Cole texted Blaze was 512. 512 people who had driven through January in Montana because a 9-year-old boy had survived something that was designed to kill him, and his father had built a case that deserved to be heard. The meeting between Reeves and Deputy U.S. Attorney Gerald Foss happened at 8:47 p.m. in a conference room at a hotel in Great Falls, 60 miles from Silver Creek. Marcus was there. Phil Garrett from the state attorney's office was there. Ricky Delgado delivered his copy of The Drive 20 minutes before the meeting started. What happened in that room, Blaze found out through Marcus's call at 10:15, lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Foss had looked at the financial records first. He'd gone through them page by page methodically, the way a man goes through documents when he's looking for holes and not finding them. Then the photographs. Then the emails between Tom Parker and Carol Reeves. Then the letter. When he finished the letter, he'd put it down on the table and looked at Reeves and said, "How long have you been trying to move this case?" 14 months, Reeves said, "and you were put on leave." 3 weeks ago, Foss had looked at Marcus then. "Who are you?" "I'm the man whose friend found the boy in the ditch," Marcus said. "The boy whose father wrote that letter." Foss had looked at the letter again, at the last line. "I love you more than everything." "Where is the boy now?" he asked. "Safe," Marcus said, "as safe as we can make him." Foss had nodded, turned to his own laptop, started typing. "I'm filing for emergency federal warrants tonight," he said without looking up. "Arrest, search, evidence, preservation. All of it. I'm calling the FBI field office in Helena, not Billings, and I'm going over the head of everyone who's touched this case since Parker died." He stopped typing for a moment. "I want you to understand something. If this drive contains what it appears to contain, and it does, I can see that already then, what we're looking at is not just a county corruption case. We're looking at obstruction of a federal investigation conspiracy to commit murder and the unlawful imprisonment of a minor. This is going to be significant." "How soon?" Marcus asked. Foss looked at him. "Before sunrise." When Marcus called Blaze with that information, Blaze was sitting in a room at a motel outside Silver Creek, clean anonymous, paid cash registered to a name that wasn't his, with Ethan asleep in the other bed. The boy had gone under fast and hard, the sleep of someone whose body had finally, after a very long time, decided it was safe enough to let go. Blaze sat in the chair by the window and listened to Marcus give him the summary and said almost nothing because there was almost nothing to say. The mechanism was in motion. The federal machinery was moving. Before sunrise, Foss had said, before sunrise. He looked at Ethan sleeping. The boy's breathing was deep and even. His color was better than it had been 12 hours ago. The terrible gray-blue was gone, replaced by something closer to what 9 years old should look like. His hands were open, relaxed on top of the blanket. No tension in them, no bracing. For the first time in 13 months, probably Ethan Parker was sleeping without listening for the door. Blaze sat there and watched over him and thought about Tom Parker driving north on Route 191 on an icy night 14 months ago, knowing at some level, on some edge of himself, that he hadn't told his son about, that the math he'd found was dangerous enough to be the last math he ever found, and choosing anyway to teach his boy the combination to a lock. His phone buzzed at 2:17 in the morning. Cole. A text, not a call. 6 words. They're moving on Kane's property. Now. Blaze looked at the text, then he looked at Ethan. Then he set the phone face down on the side table, leaned back in the chair, and stayed exactly where he was. Because the right place to be at 2:17 in the morning, when federal agents were executing warrants across Silver Creek County, was not in the action. The right place was in this chair, in this room, watching over a sleeping boy who had earned the right to sleep without someone guarding the door, which meant someone needed to be guarding the door. He was still there at 4 a.m. when his phone lit up with Marcus's name. He answered on the first ring. "It's done," Marcus said. 2 words. But the way Marcus said them, the particular exhale underneath them, the release of something that had been held for 48 hours, told Blaze everything he needed before Marcus said another syllable. "Kane," he asked. "In custody as of 40 minutes ago, taken from his home, 4 other arrests in the county, 2 from the sheriff's office, 1 from the county commissioner's office, 1 from Kane's personal staff." A pause. "They also found evidence at Kane's property, physical evidence of the financial fraud communications between Kane and the people above him in the network, and—" Marcus stopped. "And what records?" Marcus said, his voice quieter now. "About Ethan, about Parker. Communications between Kane and the 2 men who put that boy in the ditch." His voice was absolutely flat. "They planned it 3 days in advance. It's documented. They made plans to—" He stopped again. "To make sure the boy didn't survive the storm." Blaze said nothing. "He was 9 years old," Marcus said, "and they sat around and planned it." The room was very quiet. "Is Ethan okay?" Marcus asked. Blaze looked at the trio, still sleeping, hands still open. "Yeah," he said. "He's okay. Get some sleep. I'll be there in the morning." "Marcus?" "Yeah. Good work." A short pause. "Tell that to Tom Parker," Marcus said, and hung up. Blaze set the phone down. Outside somewhere across Silver Creek County, federal agents were moving through buildings and offices and homes with warrants and evidence bags, pulling 8 years of carefully concealed corruption into the light. Richard Kane was in a federal holding facility. The men who had wrapped a 9-year-old boy in a tarp and left him in a ditch were in custody. The drive that Tom Parker had spent his last weeks building, that his son had carried in his memory through 13 months of imprisonment, was in the hands of a deputy U.S. attorney who had said the word significant and meant it. And 512 people were still at the Miller County Fairgrounds. Not because they'd been asked to stay, because they were waiting to know the boy was safe. Blaze texted Cole at 4:15. "It's done. Kane in custody. Federal arrests. Boy is safe." Cole's response came back in 40 seconds. "I'll tell them." What happened next at those fairgrounds, Blaze didn't witness. But Cole described it to him later. He said he walked out to where people were gathered in the covered pavilion and in the parking areas, and he told them simply, "Federal arrest, Kane in custody, the boy is safe." And he said the sound that went through the crowd was not cheering exactly. He said it was something quieter than cheering. He said it was the sound people make when something they were afraid wasn't going to be okay turns out to be okay. He said it lasted about 10 seconds. And then someone started making coffee for 500 people at 4 in the morning, and someone else started a collection for blankets. And within 20 minutes, the fairgrounds had turned into something that looked less like a biker rally and more like a neighborhood coming together after a storm, which Cole said later was exactly what it was. Ethan Parker woke up at 6:43 in the morning, which was almost exactly 24 hours after he had woken up the day before in a hospital bed. He lay still for a moment, the way he had learned to, checking his surroundings. Then he saw Blaze in the chair, and his body relaxed by degrees like a fist very slowly unclenching. "You stayed up all night again," Ethan said. "Old habit," Blaze said. Ethan sat up slowly, looked around. Did something happen? Blaze leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the boy. "Kane's in custody," he said. "Federal arrest. 4 other people from the county, too. It happened a few hours ago." Ethan was very still. "It's over," he said. "The most important part is over," Blaze said carefully. "There'll be court cases, investigations, more of that kind of thing. That goes on for a while, but Kane is in federal custody. The evidence is in federal hands. The people who—" He stopped, chose the words. "The people who hurt you and your dad can't reach you anymore." Ethan looked at the window. He didn't cry. He didn't make a sound. He just looked at the window for a long time, and whatever was happening inside him, it was something private. Something between him and his father and the 13 months that had gone between Tom Parker's death and this morning, and Blaze did not disturb it. After a while, Ethan said, 500 people, 512. They all stayed. They're still there, Blaze said. At the fairgrounds, they wanted to know you were safe. Ethan looked at him. They don't know me. No, Blaze said, but they know what happened to you. The boy turned that over. My dad said, he stopped, started again. My dad said the most dangerous thing in the world for someone like Kane was ordinary people deciding to pay attention. A pause, fun. He said Kane counted on people looking away. He said the whole thing only worked if people kept looking away. Blaze nodded. 500 people, Ethan said again. Softer this time. 512 people, Blaze said, who decided not to look away. Ethan looked at the window again. Outside somewhere, the sun was coming up over Silver Creek, Montana, coming up over a town that was about to wake to the news of federal arrests and a corruption network 8 years in the making, coming apart in a single night, coming up over a fairgrounds where 500 people were drinking coffee and keeping each other warm, waiting for word about a boy they'd never met. Coming up over a motel room where a 9-year-old boy who had survived everything that had been designed to stop him sat in a bed with his hands loose in his lap, breathing in the particular quality of a morning where something terrible was finally finished. Can we go see them? Ethan asked. Blaze looked at him. The 500 people? No, Ethan said. Can we go see them? It was the first thing Ethan had asked for since the pancakes. Yeah, Blaze said. He stood up. Let's go. The drive to the fairgrounds took 11 minutes. Blaze drove. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, not the back, the front, because Blaze had opened the passenger door without thinking about it, and Ethan had climbed in like it was the most natural thing in the world, and neither of them remarked on it. The radio was off. The heater was running. Outside the window, Silver Creek was waking up slowly the way small towns do in January, smoke beginning to rise from chimneys, a light going on here and there in a kitchen window. Ethan watched it all. Is it always this quiet? He asked. In the morning, yeah. I grew up here, Ethan said. I mean, I was born here. Before everything. He paused. It looks different now. Blaze glanced at him. Different how? Ethan thought about it. Smaller, he said, but not in a bad way. Before, when my dad was alive, it felt like the whole world. Now it just feels like a town. He paused again. I think that's okay. Blaze nodded, said nothing. Let the boy think. They were 2 minutes from the fairgrounds when Ethan said, What happens to me now, after today? The question landed quietly without drama, but Blaze felt the weight of it the same way you feel the weight of something large and important being set down in front of you. That's something we figure out together, Blaze said. There are people, social services, the court system who will be involved because of your age. But none of that happens today. Today is just today. Ethan nodded. I don't have any family, he said. My dad was an only child. My grandparents on his side are gone. My mom's family, I never really knew them. I know. So technically, I'd go to foster care. Technically, Blaze said. A short pause. Is that what's going to happen? Ethan asked. Blaze looked at the road ahead. I had a conversation with Marcus last night, he said, while you were sleeping, and then I made a phone call. Ethan looked at him. I called a lawyer, Blaze said, a good one, in Great Falls. She handles family law. I asked her what it would take. He paused, kept his eyes on the road. For someone to file for guardianship of a specific child, quickly. The truck was quiet for a moment. You called a lawyer, Ethan said. About me. At 2 a.m, Sir Blaze said. She was not happy about that part, but she answered. Ethan looked at him for a longer time. Blaze could feel the look, the way you feel someone watching you present and real and full of something that hadn't found its shape yet. You would do that, Ethan said. You'd want to do that. Blaze pulled the truck to a stop at the entrance to the fairgrounds. Turned to face the boy. I don't do things I don't want to do, he said. Haven't for a long time. Life's too short for that. Ethan looked at him. Those old blue eyes, the ones that had seen things no 9-year-old should see. In them, right now, something was shifting, something careful and guarded and long defended was starting slowly to move. I'd have to think about it, Ethan said. His voice was serious, deliberate, like he was honoring the weight of the question by not answering it carelessly. That's exactly the right answer, Blaze said. Ethan almost smiled, not quite, but almost. Okay, he said, let's go see 500 people. What Ethan Parker saw when he stepped out of that truck was something he would describe 8 months later to a documentary crew as the most confusing and overwhelming and strangely right moment of his life. 500 people. More actually, the final count was 527, because a handful of additional riders had come through overnight, spread across the Miller County Fairgrounds in the early morning. Some were by their bikes and trucks. Some were inside the covered pavilion where someone had set up folding tables with coffee urns and food that had appeared in the way food appears at gatherings of people who understand that feeding others is a form of care. Some were just standing, talking the low hum of a large group of people who have been through something together and are now processing it in the way humans always have, by being near each other. When Cole Hutchins spotted Blaze's truck pulling in, he said something to the people near him. And the word spread the way words spread through a crowd when the crowd has been waiting for a specific piece of information. By the time Blaze and Ethan walked through the entrance, people were turning to look. Not rushing forward, not overwhelming, just turning and going quiet and looking with the particular quality of people who wanted to see for themselves that the thing they'd driven through the Montana winter for was real and standing on his own feet. Ethan stopped walking. He stood there and looked at all of them. 500 faces, weathered faces, young faces, old faces. Men with gray beards and women with kind eyes, and people who had driven hundreds of miles through January cold because a story had reached them, and they had decided it required a response. Blaze stopped beside him. "You okay?" he said quietly. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the crowd, and the crowd was looking at him, and the silence between them had a texture to it, full and fragile at the same time. "They really came," Ethan said. "They really came. All of them. All of them." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "My dad was right about ordinary people deciding to pay attention." His voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. He was right about that. Cole Hutchins came forward then because Cole had the instinct of someone who understood how to bridge a moment without crushing it. He was a big man, Cole, broad-shouldered and deliberate in the way he moved, and he stopped a few feet from Ethan and looked down at him and said simply, "You're Ethan." "Yeah," Ethan said. "I'm Cole. I ride with the Billings chapter." He extended a hand, not as a formality, as something genuine. "Your dad did a brave thing, and so did you." Ethan shook his hand. His hand was still thin, still recovering, but his grip was firm. "Thank you for coming," he said. "All of you." He looked past Cole at the crowd. I don't really know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Cole said. "We didn't come for a speech. We came to make sure you were standing." And just like that, with no fanfare and no ceremony, Ethan Parker walked into the middle of 500 people who had come for him, and they made room, and that was that. What happened in the next 2 hours at the Miller County Fairgrounds was not dramatic in the way the preceding 48 hours had been dramatic. It was something quieter and in some ways more powerful. People talked to Ethan, not about Kane, not about the evidence, not about the arrests. They talked to him the way adults talk to children when they want the child to feel like a person and not a cause. They asked him if he was warm enough. They offered him food. A woman named Grace, who had ridden from Missoula with her husband, gave him a knitted hat because she'd noticed his ears were red from the cold, and she'd had an extra in her bag. He put it on without being asked twice. Big Tommy found him near the coffee table and sat down next to him on a folding chair and said absolutely nothing for 10 minutes, which was exactly what Ethan needed without knowing he needed it. Just a large, quiet, solid presence. Proof that not all big men were something to be afraid of. Danny Reyes showed up at 8 in the morning, still moving carefully because of what had happened the night before. The 2 men in the black truck who had been watching his street had come back at midnight, and 3 members of the chapter had been there to greet them, and the conversation that followed had been brief and unambiguous. Danny had a bruised jaw and a cut above his eyebrow that Sandra had butterflied closed with medical tape. And when Ethan saw him come through the entrance, he went over to him directly because Ethan had heard enough about Danny in the past 48 hours to know what he'd contributed. "You're Danny," Ethan said. Danny looked down at him, smiled despite the bruised jaw. "Yeah, how'd you know? Blaze talks about you. He said you were the smartest person he knows, but he'd never say it to your face." Danny looked across the fairgrounds at Blaze with an expression of pure satisfaction. That's the nicest thing he's ever said about me. He also said you're annoying. There it is, Danny said, and laughed, which clearly hurt his jaw, which made him laugh again. Ethan watched him, and something in the boy's face did what it had been trying to do since early this morning. It opened slightly in the way a hand opens when it has been holding something very tightly for a very long time and finally decides it doesn't need to anymore. Marcus arrived at 9:15 with news from Gerald Foss. He pulled Blaze aside, and from the look on his face, Blaze prepared himself for something significant, which was correct. Kane's talking, Marcus said. Blaze stared at him. Already, his lawyers advised against it. He's talking anyway. Foss says Kane spent the night realizing that the evidence on the drive accounts for everything up to about 18 months ago, and he's calculating that cooperation buys him something. Marcus paused. He's giving up names. Above him. The people who facilitated the obstructions at the federal level. The people who had Carol Reeves sidelined. How high, Blaze said. Foss used the word significant again, and this time he said it like he meant something bigger than the last time he said it. Blaze looked across the fairgrounds, at Ethan, who was sitting with Grace from Missoula and accepting a second cup of hot chocolate and looking for just this moment like a boy at a gathering, and nothing more complicated than that. Tom Parker thought it went too high for the evidence to matter, Blaze said. Tom Parker didn't account for 500 witnesses, Marcus said, and a deputy U.S. attorney who apparently has wanted to go after this particular network for 3 years and just got handed everything he needed on a flash drive. Blaze absorbed that. It's going to go on for a long time, Marcus said. Court's cases, the federal investigation expands. This doesn't end in a week. I know. But Kane doesn't walk, not from this. The evidence is too clean and too complete, and too many people have seen it now. Tom Parker was good at math, Blaze said. Bren, Yemmer said, and his son remembered a combination to a lock. They stood together for a moment. I called a lawyer, Blaze said, about guardianship. Marcus looked at him, a long look, the look of someone who is not surprised but is taking a moment to let something settle. Gloria Chen, he asked. Yeah, good choice. Marcus nodded slowly. She's the best in Great Falls. I know. It's not a fast process. Even emergency guardianship takes time. And the court is going to look hard at your background, your living situation. I know all of that, Blaze said, and you're still doing it. Unless he decides he doesn't want that, Blaze said, which is his call. I told him it was his call. Marcus looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man who has known someone for 30 years and is seeing something in that person he hadn't seen before, or maybe seeing something he'd always known was there finally surface. You stopped on a highway in a blizzard, Marcus said, for a bundle of trash. Yeah. Most people don't stop. I know. Why did you? Blaze was quiet for the moment. He looked at Ethan across the fairgrounds, at the boy in Grace's borrowed hat, holding a cup of hot chocolate with both hands, listening to something Cole Hutchins was saying with the focused attention of a child who has learned to listen carefully to everything. Because something told me to, Blaze said, and I've been alive long enough to know you don't argue with that kind of something. Marcus nodded, said nothing more about it. The community gathering that Silver Creek held 6 weeks later was not planned by anyone official. It grew the way things grow in small towns when something has happened that the town needs to process together. Someone suggested it, someone else organized it. The fairgrounds were booked, and on a Saturday in late February, 300 people from Silver Creek and the surrounding area came out on a cold afternoon because they needed to stand in the same place and look at each other and acknowledge that something had broken open in their community and was slowly beginning to heal. The federal case was moving. 2 county commissioners had been charged. The sheriff had resigned. 3 of Kane's company executives were cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for reduced sentences. Richard Kane himself was in federal custody pending trial, and his lawyers were fighting a losing battle against a wall of documentation that Tom Parker had spent 2 years building and that his son had kept safe for 13 more months. The roads were still the same roads. The bridges were still the same bridges, built with substandard materials that state inspectors were now going through systematically. Some would need to be rebuilt. That would cost money county, money state, money federal remediation funds. It would take years. But it was happening. Ethan Parker stood at the front of the gathering and looked at 300 people and did not look like a child who was afraid. He looked like a boy who had been through something enormous and had come out the other side still standing, which was different from being unaffected. He was thin still, though he had gained weight steadily in the 6 weeks since the fairgrounds. His color was good. He stood straight the way kids stand when they've decided not to make themselves small anymore. He spoke without notes. He said, "My dad used to say that math doesn't lie. He spent 2 years proving that. And I spent 13 months making sure that proof didn't disappear." He paused. "I want to say thank you to the people who made sure I didn't disappear either." He looked at Danny, who was standing near the back with Sandra's hand in his jaw fully healed, grinning despite himself. He looked at Marcus, who was standing very straight with his arms crossed and his expression neutral, in the way that people who feel things deeply make their expressions neutral. He looked at Cole Hutchins, who had driven from Billings again, just for this, because Cole was that kind of man. He looked at Big Tommy, who was crying openly and making absolutely no effort to hide it, because Tommy was also that kind of man. He looked at Dr. Patricia Voss, who had taken a front row chair and was holding a tissue she hadn't used yet but was going to need. He looked at Agent Carol Reeves, who had been reinstated to full duty 6 days after the arrests and who had driven from Billings in her own car off the clock because this was not an official visit. And then he looked at Blaze. Blaze Walker was standing at the side of the crowd, not at the front, not in the center, standing the way he stood most places, like a man who knows where he is and has decided it's the right place to be. He had his jacket on. The scar on his forearm was covered. He was watching Ethan with an expression that was impossible to fully read and very easy to understand. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he said into the quiet of 300 people listening, "There's one person I need to say something specific to." He didn't look away from Blaze. "You stopped on a highway in a blizzard. You didn't have to. Most people drive past. You stopped." A pause. "You told me later that you almost didn't. And I think you told me that, so I understand that doing the right thing isn't always automatic. That sometimes it's a choice. A real one." His voice was steady, clear. The voice of someone who has thought about what he wants to say and is saying it. "You made that choice, and then you made about 50 more choices after it. Each one harder than the last." He paused again. "You didn't just save me. You gave me a future. And you gave me," he stopped, just for a moment, "you gave me somewhere to go back to." The fairgrounds were very quiet. The guardianship had been finalized 4 days earlier. Gloria Chen, the best family law attorney in Great Falls, had moved it through the system with the kind of focused determination that came from believing in what she was doing. The court had reviewed Blaze Walker's background, all of it openly, without him hiding any of it, and had determined that a man who had stopped his truck in a blizzard for a child he didn't know who had stayed awake for 48 hours to keep that child safe, who had put 500 people in motion to protect one boy's life, was a man capable of providing a stable and loving home. The judge had signed the order on a Tuesday afternoon. Blaze had been sitting in Gloria Chen's office when it came through. He had read it twice. Then he had folded it carefully, put it in his jacket pocket, driven back to Silver Creek, walked into the house, his house, the one he'd lived in alone for 11 years, and found Ethan in the kitchen, attempting to make a sandwich with the focused intensity of someone treating a sandwich as an engineering problem. He'd put the folded paper on the counter in front of the boy. Ethan had read it once. Then he'd looked up. "It's official," he said. "It's official." Ethan had looked at the paper again. Then he'd picked up his sandwich, taken a bite, and said with his mouth full, "I'm going to need my own shelf in the fridge." Blaze had laughed, the real kind, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. "Deal," he said. Now standing at the side of a crowd of 300 people, while a boy he had found in a ditch 6 weeks ago said things into a microphone that Blaze would not repeat to anyone for a very long time because they were not the kind of things you repeated. They were the kind of things you carried now. Blaze Walker felt something that he would not call by its right name in public, but that he knew the name of in private. It was the feeling of something lost being found, not the drive, not the evidence, not even the boy exactly. Something in himself, something he hadn't known was missing until the moment it came back. 300 people began to applaud. Big Tommy was no longer bothering to pretend he wasn't crying. Ethan stepped back from the microphone and looked at Blaze, and Blaze looked at Ethan, and the look between them contained everything that had happened in 6 weeks and everything that was going to happen in all the years after, and neither of them needed to say anything because it was already said. Tom Parker had been right about ordinary people paying attention. He had been right about math not lying. He had been right that the truth was the only thing that could protect his son. And he had been right about one more thing he had written in a letter for a child to find under a workbench in a cold workshop at the end of a long and terrible road. He had said, find someone you can trust completely, someone with nothing to lose and nothing to gain except doing the right thing. Ethan Parker had found him. In the dark, in a ditch, in a blizzard on a highway that most people drove past without stopping. He had found exactly who his father told him to find. And that one act of stopping that single moment, where a man chose not to keep driving, had pulled an entire thread, had brought 500 people out of the cold, had put a corrupt man in federal custody, had delivered a dead man's evidence into the hands of people who could use it, had given a town back the truth it had been paying for without knowing it, and had given one 9-year-old boy the one thing that no corruption network and no powerful man and no Montana blizzard had been able to take from him permanently. A place to come home to. Some stories end with justice. Some end with healing. The best ones, the ones that stay with you, that you carry around for years in the quiet part of yourself, end with both. This one did.